Inside the ancient walls of Windsor Castle, something quiet but powerful was already unfolding behind closed doors. No grand ceremony announced it, no public warning hinted at what was coming. Yet at the center of it all stood Prince William and the monarchy's most disciplined force, Princess Anne. What first appeared to be a simple royal restoration soon revealed itself as something far deeper, a carefully orchestrated shift tied directly to the legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales. But was this truly an act of remembrance, or the final stage of a decades-long reckoning? Because by the time Queen Camilla realized what was happening, the process had already passed the point of no return, and nothing inside the palace could stop what came next. What was really happening behind those royal walls? Stay until the end because the truth behind this silent operation changes everything. The strategy nobody saw coming. From the outside, Windsor Castle appeared exactly as it always had, calm, controlled, untouched by controversy. No public statements were released, no visible tension escaped into the headlines. Royal duties continued as normal, giving the impression that the institution remained perfectly stable. But beneath that carefully protected silence, a far more deliberate operation was quietly advancing. This wasn't a sudden emotional reaction. It wasn't a rushed decision triggered by recent events or outside pressure. Instead, it was a methodical process shaped patiently over time, where every stage connected flawlessly to the next. Each move had been positioned with precision, guiding events toward a final outcome that would become impossible to reverse once completed. Nothing was accidental. At the center of the operation stood Prince William. His role was not ceremonial or symbolic. It was focused, strategic, and rooted in a much deeper objective that had been forming for years. Inside the monarchy, intentions alone carry little power. What matters is the ability to transform those intentions into institutional reality. And William understood that completely. That is exactly where Princess Anne became critical. She wasn't simply supporting events from the sidelines. She became the structural force that allowed the entire plan to function inside the monarchy itself. Known for her discipline and unwavering loyalty to royal protocol, Anne possessed a kind of authority that rarely needed public display to be effective. Her influence worked quietly, through structure, timing, and absolute precision. Where William carried the emotional purpose behind the mission, Anne provided the institutional framework that protected it from resistance. Every procedural detail was handled in advance, every formal requirement was satisfied before questions could even emerge. On the surface, nothing appeared unusual, yet underneath, the foundation of royal memory was already being carefully rearranged. The operation moved forward in total silence. Approvals passed discreetly through internal channels. Access to sensitive royal areas was tightly controlled. Schedules were arranged in ways that avoided public scrutiny. Every decision was supported by historical precedent, making it nearly impossible to challenge. There were no loose ends. Rather than confronting the royal system directly, the plan worked entirely from within, using the monarchy's own rules to reshape the outcome itself. And by the time the final phase arrived, the result no longer depended on permission. The decision had effectively been secured long before anyone outside the process realized what was happening. Perhaps the most revealing detail of all was who remained excluded from the center of it all. Queen Camilla was not merely uninformed, her distance from the operation appeared intentional from the beginning. There were no communication mistakes, no accidental oversights. Her separation from the core decisions had already been built into the structure of the plan itself. By the time everything aligned inside Windsor Castle, there was no realistic opportunity left for intervention. The decision had already crossed the line where it could no longer be undone. The restoration that changed royal history. Once the groundwork inside Windsor had quietly been secured, the final stage unfolded with astonishing speed. What looked like a simple adjustment within the palace carried the emotional weight of more than 2 decades. No announcement prepared the public for it. No debate preceded it. It simply happened, as though the moment had been waiting patiently for years. Inside the Hall of Matriarchs, a space deeply connected to royal legacy and historical continuity, one absence had quietly defined the room since 1997, the absence of Diana. For decades, visitors walking those halls could feel that silence without anyone speaking about it directly. Then suddenly, without warning, that silence ended. The portrait of Diana, Princess of Wales, was brought forward and installed with unmistakable intention. Not hidden in the background, not placed in a lesser position, but exactly where many believed it had always belonged, beside Queen Elizabeth II herself. The symbolism required no explanation. This did not feel temporary. It did not appear symbolic in a limited sense. The placement carried the unmistakable feeling of permanence. Once positioned, it immediately became clear that this was not a decision likely to be revisited later. And what made the moment even more powerful was the precision behind it. Every royal guideline had already been reviewed, every protocol had been followed. The rules governing portrait placement inside that historic space had not been ignored, they had been carefully used to support the outcome. There was no procedural weakness left exposed, no overlooked technicality, no opening for objections to gain traction. Although Diana's legacy has always carried enormous emotion, this operation itself was not driven by emotion alone. It reflected years of patient preparation finally reaching its intended conclusion. Each quiet decision made behind palace walls had been leading to this exact moment. Those who witnessed it understood immediately what they were seeing, even without words being spoken aloud. A royal space that once felt incomplete suddenly seemed whole again. And in that silence, one reality became impossible to ignore. This was never just about restoring a portrait. It was about permanently securing Diana's place inside the monarchy's historical identity in a way that could no longer be questioned, minimized, or quietly removed. The moment control slipped away. What made the entire operation even more remarkable was its timing. Every stage appeared carefully engineered to leave no room for interruption, delay, or outside interference. And during the final phase, Queen Camilla happened to be away from London on scheduled royal duties. On the surface, her itinerary looked entirely routine, but in hindsight, the timing aligned almost perfectly with the completion of the events unfolding inside Windsor. While Camilla remained occupied elsewhere, the operation quietly reached its conclusion. By the time she returned, the shift inside the institution was already complete. There was no gradual transition, no warning period. The atmosphere had already changed before she stepped back into the center of royal activity. At the heart of that completed transformation stood Diana's portrait, now fully installed inside the Hall of Matriarchs. The placement had already been finalized, documentation had already been processed, every internal approval had already been secured. Nothing remained unfinished. And when the reality finally reached Queen Camilla, the reaction inside palace circles was said to be immediate. First came shock, then anger, then urgency. Questions were reportedly raised immediately, clarifications were demanded, requests for meetings followed quickly as efforts were made to understand and possibly challenge what had already been completed. But this time, something inside the royal structure felt very different. Each attempt to reopen the matter reportedly met the same response: firm refusal. No reconsideration, no emergency review, no reversal. For perhaps the first time in decades, the institution itself no longer appeared willing to bend in response to her influence. The system had already absorbed the decision internally before objections could fully form. What was unfolding inside Windsor no longer resembled a temporary disagreement. It looked more like a complete structural closure, one designed long before anyone outside the process realized what was happening. A promise carried across decades. As the reality of the moment settled across Windsor Castle, it became increasingly clear that this operation had not appeared overnight. For Prince William, the origins stretched all the way back to 1997. At only 15 years old, he walked behind the coffin of his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, in one of the most unforgettable scenes in modern royal history. Beneath the public grief of that moment existed something quieter but far more enduring, a promise that never needed to be spoken aloud. As years passed, that promise evolved. What began as personal grief slowly transformed into a long-term sense of responsibility. William did not move emotionally or impulsively. Instead, he learned patience. He studied the institution from within. He understood that meaningful change inside the monarchy could never happen suddenly. It required preparation. Quietly, behind palace walls, that preparation began taking shape. Discussions were reportedly taking place with palace archivists regarding how royal history is preserved. Protocols surrounding portrait placement were reviewed carefully. Every institutional rule was studied not to challenge the monarchy directly, but to understand how permanent change could be achieved from within the system itself. This level of precision revealed something important. William was not simply seeking a symbolic tribute to his mother. He was working towards something permanent, ensuring that Diana's place within royal history could no longer be quietly diminished over time. And standing beside him throughout the final phase was Princess Anne. With Anne's authority reinforcing the operation, years of planning finally transformed into execution. The promise born in 1997 had now become reality within the very institution where Diana's absence had once been allowed to remain. The silent architect behind it all. Although the emotional core of the mission centered on William, the structure that carried it to completion belonged largely to Princess Anne. From the earliest stages of the final operation inside Windsor Castle, Anne reportedly oversaw the most sensitive elements personally. Her focus remained entirely on execution. Timing had to be exact, access had to remain controlled, potential disruption had to be eliminated before it could even develop. Under her supervision, no room for error existed. What made Anne's role so decisive was how she framed the entire act internally. This was not presented as adding something new to royal history. Instead, it was treated as correcting an omission already believed to exist within the monarchy's historical narrative. That distinction changed everything. When Diana's portrait was finally brought into position beside Queen Elizabeth II, the room reportedly fell completely silent. No applause followed, no ceremony interrupted the moment, because those present already understood the significance without needing words. Princess Anne was not reacting emotionally to the event, she was finalizing it. And according to palace insiders, it was during this final phase that Anne quietly affirmed what had long remained unspoken, that Diana belonged permanently within that space, not as a fading memory, but as part of the monarchy's enduring legacy itself. The silence from the crown. Following the placement, Queen Camilla reportedly turned toward the one figure expected to intervene, King Charles III. For years, Charles had been viewed as her strongest source of institutional support. In previous moments of pressure or criticism, he had consistently protected her position within the monarchy, which is why what happened next became so significant. No intervention came. No order was issued to reverse the decision. No formal objection emerged from the king. Instead, there was only silence. And within royal institutions, silence often speaks louder than direct statements. For Camilla, the absence of action marked a turning point impossible to ignore. The protective structure she had long depended upon simply did not activate this time. By refusing to intervene, King Charles effectively allowed the decision to stand untouched. And in doing so, the balance inside the monarchy quietly shifted. No public declaration announced the change, yet inside the institution, the lack of resistance carried enormous meaning. The outcome no longer depended on approval, it now existed through silent acceptance. The monarchy begins to rebalance. Afterwards, the effects did not remain limited to Windsor Castle alone. Gradually, subtle changes began spreading throughout the wider royal structure. The shift did not arrive through dramatic announcements, but through evolving patterns of visibility, influence, and public focus. Within this new atmosphere, Catherine, Princess of Wales, started taking on an increasingly central role in royal duties. Her work began reflecting themes long associated with Diana: children's welfare, emotional well-being, compassion, and community support. At the same time, charitable initiatives once strongly connected to Diana slowly returned to greater prominence, not through loud relaunches, but through careful reintegration into royal activity. The monarchy's public messaging also began changing. Compassion, connection, long-term social impact. These themes became increasingly central once again. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's visibility within key royal moments appeared to shift in the opposite direction. There was no public removal and no official demotion. Instead, her presence simply seemed less central than before. Inside royal structures, this was viewed not as elimination, but repositioning. And through these controlled changes, the monarchy itself appeared to be quietly redefining its future identity. So, what do you think truly shaped this royal turning point most? Was it Prince William's decades-long promise to Diana, Princess Anne's disciplined control behind palace walls, or King Charles's silence that allowed everything to become permanent? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next royal revelation.